The silence is breaking. In the dark corners of the land, something stirs. My journey in this strange new world continues. With spring coming to an end and nature in full bloom, it was time to get to work. I had plans for the summer, and the world had plans for me. My morning routine was coming up with a list of things to accomplish, and today was no different. Except a large black wolf had gotten trapped in my field. I had yet to encounter such a dangerous animal. In the woods, I would have probably ran away and fast, but trapped here, I had to dispatch it. Then, its partner jumped in over the fence to protect it. It's safe to say I took no joy in this task, and to add to the tragedy, 2 yelping young pups appeared from the tall grass. Even caged, the wolves were fearsome and tough. It was time to switch strategies. I crafted 4 more spears. When thrown, the spears seemed to be far more effective. I had to wonder if this was some sort of a sign, an omen. My mind had begun drawing strange connections. Everything that happened out here in the wilderness was the work of a delicate balance between luck, karma, and a third force. Something more sinister, I was sure. Over time, I would get to learn its secrets. I gathered the hides and meat from the poor animals, then started inspecting the enclosure. I had left the dirt hills too close to the fence, which created an easy access for wild animals, straight to my crops. Then I planted the next batch of seeds. This time I replaced the soil with medium fertility dirt. Hopefully this row of turnips would grow faster. I oiled the raw hides with animal fat to keep them from spoiling. Next, it was time to acquire some bees. I found a nearby hive. It had only a poor population, but my hope was that by planting flowers, the bees would thrive and eventually populate my skep. I dedicated my evening to the search for more copper bits and nearly tripped over a wolf. It wasn't a very good swimmer, however, so I managed to chase it off. Today yielded only 3 copper nuggets, 13 left to go. The sky had turned blood red. There was no question in my mind. This was somehow connected to today's wolf encounters. After returning home, I discovered a page in the handbook about panning. Perhaps I could gather the rest of the copper from sand tomorrow. I grabbed a bunch of pine cones that were scattered among my supplies and planted them in a row outside. I had plans for building a larger house, and that would take a lot of wood. Today I wanted to try my luck with panning. I grabbed the stack of gravel I had in my house, then hopped in the water. I didn't know what to expect, but I was hopeful. The first thing that washed out into my pan was a nugget of copper. With this exciting revelation, I kept panning and panning and panning. I was steadily finding copper nuggets, along with clay, zinc, and quartz chunks. I took a break to craft a basket from my findings. Eventually, I found all the copper I needed. What surprised me the most was an ancient archaeological find, a copper spearhead. It would prove quite useful later. In my haste, I had forgotten that in order to melt copper, the campfire would have to burn much hotter. For this, I needed charcoal. I had to dig a pit, then fill it to the brim with firewood. Getting enough would take some serious deforestation. As my baskets were nearing full, I noticed a fog slowly settling into the valley, the second eerie weather event in the span of 2 days. Nature clearly wasn't thrilled about my exploits. It was dark when I finally had the pit full of logs. I lit it on fire and covered it with a dirt mound, where it would bake into crispy piles of charcoal. Then I used the rest of the night to prepare an anvil mold and a second storage vessel to be fired. Today marked my first full month in the wilderness, and it looked like I was here to stay. My full focus now was to get the homestead up and running in time for winter. An endless list of small tasks would keep me busy. First on my list was the apiary. After picking a good spot for the enclosure, I started laying down a fence. Soon enough, I would have my very own bee colony and copious amounts of honey and wax. I arranged the flowers to the best of my ability, and I was pretty proud of the cozy little habitat. Next to it, however, was a giant sinkhole, and I saw movement below. The bottom of the hole was lined with bones and 3 small critters trapped with no way out. I had to help them. I hope these remains were just tragic accidents and not some creature's nest. Then my curiosity led me deeper. I was ambushed by hideous humanoid creatures. I had no choice but to fight back. These were the creatures that I had seen lurking around in the night. Their bodies were horrifying, a rust-colored substance oozing out of their wounds. After checking the bottom of the cave, I climbed out. This sinkhole needed to be sealed once and for all. When it was shut, I went ahead and sealed another one next to it. Hopefully those creepy cave dwellers would not emerge again. To cool off my nerves, I went to check on the skep. Sadly, it was still empty, and as I inspected the beehive, I think I may have learned why. The bees had only found 3 of my flowers, and I figured the hive was too high up to find more. I made an elevated platform under the hive and planted the flowers on it. Perhaps tomorrow I would have better luck. The charcoal had stopped smoking, so I dug up the mound and started harvesting it. Half a stack of charcoal would last me for a good while. It was finally time for copper tools. I loaded up the nuggets into the crucible and started cooking. Then I made some tongs to handle the glowing hot vessel. There it was, a month of backbreaking work, all for this moment. Well, soon anyway, as the copper needed time to cool down. I oiled some of the hair skins from the sinkhole, then I tossed their remains in the fire pit. I had started developing small rituals to see how they might affect my fortune. Anything to help understand the greater forces at work in this world. It wouldn't be too long until I started discovering answers. Then I started the process of laying down thatch on the roof. Finally, the copper had cooled, and I crafted my first copper pickaxe. Oh, it was a beauty. The next day, I wanted to take care of that copper deposit I had stumbled upon earlier. I noticed that the material was chipping off in large chunks. It needed to be further smashed down with a hammer, which I didn't have yet. At the bottom, I found a crushed raccoon carcass. It looked like the wildlife had an unfortunate habit of falling down these steep caves. Clearing the vein amounted for a total of 47 chunks. On the way out, I stopped by the beehive. It looked like my idea had worked, and the bee population was growing. In 5 more days, the bees would start populating my skep. Unfortunately, I needed 20 more copper nuggets for the hammer, so I went panning again. After the entire day had passed sifting through gravel, I managed to collect enough copper, along with a number of arrowheads and other curious finds. I heated up the crucible once again. While the hammerhead was cooling, I occupied myself with some tasks around the homestead. Planting a new row of crops always managed to improve my mood. Now, with the addition of a hammer, I managed to crush the malachite chunks and retrieved a total of 180 nuggets. I dropped them into the crucible. While they cooked, I went to shovel another 2 stacks of clay to prepare more molds for an axe and ingots. The melted malachite amounted to 940 units of copper. I poured a prospecting pick head in a spare pickaxe head. The rest of the copper I dumped into the anvil mold. After a quick clay sculpting session, I loaded up the kilns once again. I wanted to get the anvil done as soon as possible, so I could start forging more intricate tools. The first tool I wanted was a saw so I could start processing wood into boards in preparation for a proper house build. Then I spotted a rift near the homestead. It looked like rift activity was picking up in the area. I wasn't thrilled. As my next chore, I collected a few more stacks of medium fertility soil. Then I tested the newly crafted prospecting pick. After collecting samples from 3 stone blocks, I was given a reading of the type of ores that occurred in the area. This would be great for eventually finding tin, my next step in metallurgy progression. I remembered that ore deposits could also be found directly under bits that were lying on the surface. So I returned to the spot where I found my first copper bits. Sure enough, under it was a small deposit of copper. Among it was also quartz, but it was too hard to mine with copper tools. I emerged from the dig site with 16 medium copper chunks. I had to wait for the ingot molds to finish firing, so I left the chunks at the cabin and went for a second round of collecting thatch. On the walk back, I noticed even more rifts had popped up in the area. I wondered what they entailed. Nothing good, that was for sure. I installed the thatch roofing, finishing the first half completely. Then after a long day, it was time to sleep. I wanted to set aside some time today for terraforming. Shaping the land around the homestead had several benefits. First, it would make moving around easier and increase visibility. Second, I wanted to scout for a good spot to start building the main house. The footprint I was planning would be roughly 15 blocks to a side, and I needed to flatten out a large enough area for it. I would also eventually carve out paths connecting all the different buildings. It was nice to focus on just one thing for the day. The previous days, I would jump between 4 or 5 different tasks, which would often feel pretty hectic. It felt like I was getting more work done this way. After shaving down the top 3 layers off a hill, it was starting to look like a decent spot for the house, not too far from the farm. As an added benefit, my basement would have a quartz deposit readily available. I had gathered over 6 stacks of dirt, so I used it to fill in some of the dips in the terrain. A pond in front of the hill had to go as well, as it would be in the way of my main road. Hungry after a hard day's work, I loaded the last of my forage supplies into a pot for dinner. After wolfing down the entire pot, I retrieved the finished ingot molds, cracked open the copper chunks, and started melting my last batch of copper. Then I crafted a forge, used for reheating the ingots into a workable temperature. The pelts had also finished curing, and I managed to craft 3 hunter backpacks. They would each grant me an extra inventory slot. Finally, I filled up the anvil mold and had spare copper for 1 full ingot. As I placed the anvil down, thunder echoed in the distance. Poetic almost. The world had something in store for me, I was certain. I woke up the next day to a steadily mounting rain. A storm was brewing. I fired up the forge with my lone copper ingot. Learning the art of smithing would be crucial for long-term survival. I laid down the first blocks of a path outside, and once the ingot was glowing hot, I started working on a saw blade. The process looked daunting, but it was rather intuitive. One by one, I hammered the blocks of copper into the shape of a saw. I grabbed the hot piece of copper with my tongs and went to quench it in the water. It made a very satisfying hiss. With a saw added to my tool collection, nothing was stopping me from getting started on the construction of a house. I chopped down a massive oak in the nearby woods, then went up to the quartz hill to start laying foundations. I was planning a medium-sized two-story building, 8 wide, 14 long, with an additional workshop area on one side. The amount of materials I would need was massive, and I wondered if I could even get this house finished before winter. The idea of wintering in my rickety, crowded cabin gave me the shivers. I had eaten the last of my food supplies yesterday, so it was high time to check on my crops. It looked like the turnips planted on the medium soil would be the first to be ready, any day now. Unfortunately, the summer temperatures meant their yield wouldn't be optimal. I spent the remaining daylight occupied with terraforming, then went to sleep. But sleep never came. Some sort of temporal storm was underway. I sprang up from bed in a state of delirium, hobbling over to the door. In the distance, all manner of vile horrors moved in the night. The world around me was a waking nightmare. Everything was moving, distorted. Shapes crawled at the edge of my vision. Disoriented, I grabbed my spear and went after a creature with a feverish frenzy. In an endless, twisted onslaught, the horrors came at me, wave after wave, relentless. This force was testing me, waiting to pounce on the first sign of weakness. But they were on my land now, and I would lay down my life to defend it. As I fell, the darkness washed over me. But it wasn't over, not like this. Slowly, I returned from the darkness, and all around me the drifters were closing in, rabid and ravenous. I ran. Far over the horizon, I saw a shape, a gargantuan nightmare roaming in the distance. My mind reeled. This couldn't be real. After a while, the storm subsided. I returned to the homestead to gather my things. The corpse of the shiver I had taken down was phasing in and out of existence, as if its grip on reality was slowly fading. I too had lost my grip that night. I returned inside, shell-shocked and unable to function. My perception of reality had shattered, and a million questions clouded my mind. 14 days in this nightmarish land. I would recover, but those memories, they would haunt me for eternity. In the darkest of times, the devastating lows, there was still hope, all around me. I needed answers. My journey would continue.